This video was filmed on Gubbi Gubbi country, and we pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, as well as any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be watching this recording. Hello and thank you for your interest in Gympie Regional Council's Digital Grant Skills Initiative. My name is Olivia Everett and I'm an independent grant writer and project coordinator based right here in the beautiful Gympie region. I've worked with many artists and arts organisations, sports and community clubs and not-for-profits to attract millions of dollars in grant funding. This video series intends to provide you with general advice, tips and tricks for approaching your next grant application and for successful applicants managing your grant-funded project well. There are 5 videos in this series covering project planning, grant writing, budgeting, marketing and grant management. You can re-watch these videos at any stage on Gympie Regional Council's website. If you have any questions or need support during the application process, Council is here to help you. If you're applying for a Gympie Regional Council grant, contact one of Council's local community development support officers or the RADF liaison officer for assistance on 1300 307 800 and remember to refer to Gympie Regional Council's website for the most up-to-date information. This video focuses on the nuts and bolts of planning a successful project. We'll talk about the key ingredients of a project, creating a project timeline, engaging with the community, and managing project risks. The ingredients of a well-planned project start with the following questions: why, what, who, when, where, how, and how much. There is a dedicated video about planning and writing your budget on Council's website. Project planning and grant writing go hand in hand. All grant applications will ask you to answer these questions in some way. You can get a head start on any grant application by considering and planning these project aspects early. Planning your project can feel overwhelming, so break your planning into smaller, more manageable bites and tackle it one step at a time. Let's talk about why first. Are you addressing a community need, gap, or opportunity? Or maybe there's a problem or a local challenge that your project addresses. Think about the impact. Who's going to benefit? What are the outcomes? What's driving you or your organisation to do this? Your what comes next. You need to be specific. Your what may be upgrading a community facility, an art exhibition or performance, or a series of youth workshops. Who is your target audience, participants, or people in the community who will benefit from your project? Be strategic and specific about who your project is for. Planning a project for the whole community that will benefit everyone is ambitious and too broad. You might miss an opportunity to connect with people of specific ages, backgrounds, or interest areas on a much deeper level. Thinking about who also means the people power involved in delivering your project. Are you working with other organisations, partners, or collaborators to deliver the project? Or will there be volunteers or committee members involved? You need to know who's involved and what role they play and what they're responsible for. You'll need to plan when your project starts and ends. If you're planning an event such as a festival, community fun day, exhibition, or workshop, you'll need to confirm your event date. You also need to think about the other tasks or milestones that need to be done in the lead up to your event date. We'll talk about this more specifically when we discuss project timelines in Chapter 5 of this video. There's no exact science to choosing a date for your event, but here are some prompts to think about. When would suit your target audience? For example, ideal times for projects aimed at primary school aged children may need to be scheduled on weekends or in school holidays. What venue would you like to use, and is it available? Is your event indoors or outdoors? You might need to think about the weather. For an example, an outdoor community mural painting project might be more suitable in the cooler, drier months. Have you considered if there are any other significant local events that your date might compete or clash with? Planning where your project will happen means confirming the venue or location. If you're planning upgrades to a community facility, this aspect might be very straightforward for you. However, for large-scale events or projects that are delivered in multiple locations, a higher level of planning will be needed. Have you considered the following? Venue access. For example, events targeting young families might need to consider pram access, the location and number of toilets, and access to parking. Required facilities. Do you need a venue with air conditioning or access to kitchen facilities? Lastly, you will need to plan how you're going to deliver your project. This will include creating a detailed project timeline and budget. Individual tasks or milestones in your timeline will need to have a resource allocated to it. In other words, who's responsible for making it happen? Being clear on roles and responsibilities is critical from the start so that everyone involved is on the same page. So why do we need to plan each of these project ingredients? Why, what, who, when, where, and how? Firstly, planning these aspects in detail will lay the foundation for a well-delivered project. These are also the crucial ingredients you will need to discuss in detail in any grant application form. Although all grant applications have different questions and requirements, and no two grant applications look the same, there are some commonalities. Commonly, one of the first key questions on a grant application form is to write your project summary or project description. This is your elevator pitch, or in other words, an opportunity to concisely capture the key ingredients of your project in a brief statement. Most grant applications will need this project description to be somewhere between 50 to 150 words. This equates to a small paragraph or somewhere between 3 to 9 sentences as a guide. You should use your project description as an opportunity to capture your why, what, who, when, where, and how as clearly as possible. Your elevator pitch should be compelling, and the reader should understand what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve quickly. Here's an example of a project description from a successful Gympie Regional Council Regional Arts Development Fund grant, also known as the RADF program. The word limit in this example is 100 words, which is approximately 6 sentences. It reads, "This project delivers 2 free grant writing workshops for Gympie Region creative practitioners, artists, and arts groups seeking funding for arts initiatives. This explains the what and the who." Funding from RADF will enable these beginner to intermediate level workshops to be fully subsidised. These workshops aim to provide a professional development opportunity and build local creative capacity. This explains the why. Workshops will be delivered in Gomerri and Gympie to ensure accessibility to a range of community members. This explains the where. The proposed workshop dates are 1st of February in Gympie and 8th of February in Gomerri. This explains the when. Topics covered include project logistics, such as insurance, contractors and volunteers, budgets including artist fees, addressing assessment criteria, partnerships and auspicing. This explains how I'm going to design and deliver these workshops. This example illustrates how to succinctly capture your project planning ingredients. You'll need to provide something like this for your project in any grant application you write. Now let's talk about project timelines in more detail. As we discussed earlier in this video, project planning and grant writing go hand in hand. Almost all grant applications will require a project timeline in some form. When planning your project, you can create your own timeline document, or for some applications, you can enter the timeline details directly into the grant application form. If creating your own, I suggest you record the following information for each task or milestone. Description of the action, task, or milestone, the date it needs to be started, and the date it needs to be completed by. This is particularly important for building and infrastructure projects or tasks with a longer duration, such as a 6-week social media campaign before an event. The location, if relevant, and who is responsible for it. If there are multiple people working on a task, make sure you nominate a task lead to oversee its completion. Here's an example of the requirements in a grant application form. This example is from the Community Facilities Grant category of Gympie Regional Council's Community Grants program. Council uses the Smarty Grants platform for all grant processes, which includes submitting your grant application. This means all grant applications to Gympie Regional Council under any grant category must be submitted online via Smarty Grants to be considered for funding. Council will not accept grant applications in any other way. You can see the project details being requested in this grant application include a project description at the top, which we have discussed in this video. You will also be required to nominate a project start date and a project end date. This should capture the start of the earliest task and then the completion of the final task in your project. When you see a red asterisk next to a question like this in Smarty Grants, this means it's mandatory. If you do not complete this question, this will create an error and you won't be able to submit your grant application form. This particular grant application form also has a section for you to enter the key project milestones. The information required here is a description of the milestone, the start date, and the end date. It's important to provide detailed information here. Don't be discouraged by the small text boxes. You can also add additional rows to your form. Remember, the more complex your project, the more milestones you will have. Think about building in some contingency time. Whether it's a facilities project, a large-scale event, or a single workshop, at the end of the day, we're all human. Disruptions and delays can and do happen in the nature of delivering projects. Allow some extra time in your planning. Accounting for unexpected hiccups in your milestone dates will act as a buffer. Even if your grant application form looks different to this, you will need to provide this information in some way. Currently, Gympie Regional Council's Regional Arts Development Fund, for example, may require you to upload a project plan as part of your support material. This attachment will need to detail all stages of your project. For example, if you are requesting a grant to develop a book, make sure you demonstrate in your project plan that you have considered publication and distribution. Your timeline is a critical project planning tool for two reasons. Firstly, it's an opportunity to understand all the tasks that need to be completed along the way. If there are multiple people contributing to the project, such as volunteers and committee members, this also ensures everyone is clear about what's required and who's responsible for what. Secondly, once you're ready to write your grant application, providing a detailed timeline is an opportunity to demonstrate strong project planning to the grant assessors. A detailed timeline will help you to illustrate that your project is viable and the people involved have the capability to deliver and manage your project successfully. During the grant application process, you may need to provide additional information, evidence, and support material to demonstrate different aspects of your project planning. A common term in grant guidelines is the idea of being shovel-ready. This relates directly to your project planning. Have you done enough planning and gathered evidence to show that you're ready to start your project? You should undertake as much planning as possible before seeking grant funding, whether it's a grant from Gympie Regional Council or another grant from the state or federal governments. Gathering information can take time. Allow your organisation plenty of time to organise extra information relevant to your project well ahead of any grant deadline. So when do you need to provide more evidence or proof of your planning? Here's some examples. You will need to provide evidence if you need permission to undertake the project. For example, if you're undertaking facilities improvements, you'll need to provide detail about land tenure arrangements. If your organisation owns the land, you'll need to provide evidence of this ownership and demonstrate how the project will benefit the broader community. If your organisation does not own the land, you will need to provide evidence of your tenure or lease agreement, as well as the landowner's permission to undertake the project. This applies if council is the landowner. Similarly, if you're planning an event or program in a public space or facility, you'll need confirmation that you've booked the venue or have the landowner's permission to use that site on your specified event dates. Let's talk about infrastructure and facilities projects a little bit more. Anything involving bricks and mortar will need to demonstrate a higher level of planning. This may be as simple as quotes, or for larger projects may include detailed information such as site plans, concept plans or facility designs, development approval or other permits, quantity surveyor estimates, and lastly, your budget. Budgets need to be supported with evidence. For example, all council grant categories will require a quote from a registered business owner for any item over $1,000. We'll talk about this in further detail in one of our other videos. Different grants will have different requirements. It's not uncommon for other grant programs from state or federal government to request 2 or 3 comparative quotes or a quantity surveyor estimate for large capital works projects. Make sure you review the grant application guidelines and any forms carefully to identify what supporting documentation you will need for your application, even if you've applied before. Now, most projects will involve the community in some way. Regardless of the grant category you are applying to, it will strengthen your application to provide proof of community support for your project. Make sure you discuss your project with other organisations or community members in the region. Letters of support from these stakeholders are a valuable tool to demonstrate community support for your project. We'll talk about letters of support in more detail in the second video about grant writing tips and tricks. For some projects, you may need to undertake more formal community consultation and engagement. This is something you may need to think about when planning your project before you start applying for grants. Community consultation is when you gather input or feedback from the community in some way and then use this information to help design and deliver a project. It's a way of listening to the needs of the people who will benefit from or be impacted by your project, or perhaps participate in your event. Just like gathering quotes or booking a venue, community engagement can take time, and you should allow for this time in your planning and project timeline. Some examples of community consultation may be consulting with local First Nations elders, consultation with the community about a public art project, or surveying members of your sports club about how to improve your facilities. Community consultation can be carried out in a variety of ways. This could be through interviews, public meetings, surveys, or a mixture of these things, depending on the community you need to talk to. Before you start, be clear about what your goals for community consultation are. How many people do you need to talk to? How much information do you need? How much community consensus do you need? And how will you respond to alternative ideas or maybe negative feedback? Keep good records and make sure you also report back to your community on the results of their feedback. If you undertake community engagement as part of your planning or delivery of your project, make sure you provide detail about this and supply evidence, such as survey results or letters demonstrating community support in your grant application. All projects have a degree of risk, and identifying and assessing these risks should form part of planning your project. Firstly, Gympie Regional Council require all grant applicants or their auspice organisation to hold $20 million of public liability insurance. An auspice organisation is another organisation who receives and manages the grant funds on your behalf if you require this support. You must upload a copy of this certificate of currency for the insurance with your grant application in Smarty Grants. This is mandatory and applies to all council grant categories. Most other funding bodies and grant programs will require applicants to hold public liability insurance to be eligible to apply, although the level of insurance coverage may vary. When considering the risks to your project, you need to think about all the risks, physical, financial, or otherwise. These risks might impact your project in a minor or a major way. What have you identified, and what are your strategies to ensure that these either don't happen or the consequences have minimal impact on the successful delivery of your project? Gympie Regional Council requires you to provide evidence about your risk management planning for some grant programs. For example, the Major Community Events grant category requires an event plan, which will need to consider risk management. Council may also request risk assessment information from Regional Arts Development Fund applicants. Regardless of whether or not risk management is mandatory as part of your grant application, you should undertake consideration and mitigation of risks as part of your project planning and delivery. In this video, we've covered the fundamentals of planning your project. I recommend planning your project before you consider looking for grant funding options. Planning your project early will give you time to consider the key ingredients of your project: why, what, who, when, where, and how. This will also help you be proactive in seeking grant funding and put together a stronger grant application. Rushing through project planning or trying to plan your project at the last minute before a grant deadline could impact your chances of funding success. It's never too early to start planning your project. If you found this video useful, I'd encourage you to share this resource with a friend, committee member, or another local community group or club. There are 4 more videos in this series of resources to support you during your next grant application. You can find these on Gympie Regional Council's website. We hope that these videos are useful to you wherever you are. However, please note that information in this video reflects the Gympie Regional Council 2024 to 2025 guidelines. Please ensure you check the relevant website and the current guidelines before submitting your application. Thank you for joining us.